Today, June the 19th, 2012, and we're interviewing Ray Biel at the Artesia Christian home located in Artesia, California. Dr. Biel is 90 years old, having been born on 9/13/22. My name is Phil Wendell, and I'll be doing the interview, and assisting me will be Karen Wells and Mayan Trefay. This interview is being done for the Rancho region of the Greater Long Beach chapter of the American Red Cross, in conjunction with the Library of Congress and the American Folk Life Center. Dr. Biel served in the United States Air Force as a first lieutenant in the 393rd Bomb Squad, the atomic bomb group in the Pacific during World War II. Welcome, Dr. Biel, and first of all, I want to thank you for your service to the country.
Pleasure to be here.
You and men like you just saved the world, and we do appreciate your time and energy in the military.
We ended the war.
You did that. And in fact, I understand that Boxcar took claim for ending the war because Enola Gay dropped theirs first.
Right.
After the Boxcar dropped theirs, and then it was all over. That was it. That was interesting. Well, I'd like to have you go back and just give us your story. Go back to where you grew up as a kid, what you remember about being a youngster, about your family, what your parents did, getting through high school, and we'll go through there chronologically until we get into the war, and I want to hear your story.
Okay, I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and as you told it, I was born September 2nd, 3rd, 1922, and went through all the schools down there in Chicago, and graduated from high school, and then went on to college, Hope College in Holland, Michigan.
What do you call that growing back up in Chicago as a kid? Were you in the country? Were you in the city?
I was in the city.
In the city?
Yeah. Father was a contractor, built houses in Chicago, and I had several paper routes when I was a kid to carry papers around my bicycle. And
any siblings?
Yeah, I had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, all older than me.
Wow.
And I was 7 years after my next sister. So I was the baby of the family.
You were surprised,
I was the baby of the family. And they probably spoiled me. But I had a very good time in Chicago. Enjoyed my schooling and so forth, and enjoyed dating a young girl from the church that I went to. And then we both went to college at the same time.
Where'd you go to high school?
Pardon me?
Where'd you go to high school? In Chicago as well?
Chicago Calumet High School.
Okay.
And
were you active in high school, sports and athletics and stuff?
No, I wasn't very athletic in that time. I wasn't very big. I was only about 150 pounds, so I couldn't play football or any of the contact sports. But I got good grades, thank goodness. And then when I went to college, I stayed there for about 1.5 years.
Where'd you go to college?
Get a deferment because I was in college.
Where'd you go? To college?
Hope College, Holland, Michigan. And
now, why'd you pick Hope College in Michigan?
Pardon?
Why'd you pick Hope?
There's a church school associated with the church that I was raised in. And the girlfriend that I was dating went to that school. Her father was the pastor of the church that I was at. And so I wanted to chase her. But then after about 1.5 years in college, I had the deferment from the Air Force. I joined the Cadet Corps. And they finally decided that they needed some pilots in the Air Force, so they ended my deferment and went into the Air Force, went through private basic training and so forth.
Where did you go to basic training?
Down in Wichita Falls, Texas.
What time of year was that? What time of the year was that?
Winter time.
Okay.
February, March.
Because it can be cold and it can be hot there.
Yeah.
There's no in between.
Oklahoma flew over in the morning and flew back at night. It right out in the Texas plains.
Yeah. So how was boot camp?
Yeah, in boot camp.
How was that experience?
Yeah, it was enjoyable. Boot camp can be rough, and they never overdid it for us. But it was different getting up 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning for me, and going out and marching and parading and then going through all of the basic training programs.
How was it being away from home for the first time?
Didn't have much problem. I was being at home, used to being at home because I'd gone to college by myself. And then after we got out of basic training, we got sent to the Cadet Corps in Tennessee. And while I was in Tennessee, I had my first experience flying because I was one of about 10 students in the 600 of guys there that got to fly the first time that I was in the air. And then we transferred to the Cadet Corps down in Maxwell Field, Alabama. And that was a real training for officers in the Air Force. And from there,
what kind of training was that for officers? Training?
Well, you had to get physically fit, and then a lot of schooling and so forth. We had to learn radio, Morse code, and so forth. And then from there, we went to primary training down in Louisiana. Can't think of what the time was.
Where were you flying?
Sebring, not Sebring.
Where were you flying down there? What kind of plane?
A little PT trainer, a little low wing trainer, and that's where I soloed and graduated from that. And then from there we went into basic training, which was a little bit bigger airplane, a single engine. And
did you know up front you were going to be going to B-29s, or did they decide later on?
Yeah. Malden, Missouri, we flew to the basic training, and then from there we went into twin engine training in Stuttgart, Arkansas, the rice country. And that's where I got my wings and my commission as second lieutenant. And from there they sent me to basic training in B-17 program in Sebring, Florida. And I had my first experience with 4-engine aircraft. Graduated from that, and then they shipped us up to...
How long were you there with the B-17 training?
B-17, probably about 6 weeks.
Okay, that's pretty quick then.
I had to do a lot of landings and takeoffs and so forth, and navigation flights.
How was it flying that airplane for the first time? What was the thrill the first time flying that airplane, the B-17?
Oh, that was a challenge, yeah. We had 4 engines, and our skipper was just back from Europe. He had been a pilot over in Europe and done about 40 missions, I think. And he taught us very well how to land that airplane. And the two of us, we would have to take off with a pilot, co-pilot with us, and shoot landings. And after
Can
about
I get
10,
my game? Okay.
after about 10 landings, he qualified you as a B-17 pilot, and then we would trade off, and by the time you got through with about 10 landings, you were tired. And then from there, I was transferred to Lincoln, Nebraska, which was a staging area for B-17 crews, and I anticipated picking up a crew and being a first pilot, but things changed. A major came through one morning in our barracks, and he said, we need some co-pilots for a B-29 program, which is just starting out in Nebraska. And he said there were about 30 fellows sitting there, and he went around and he pointed at you, and you are going to be transferred. And I was transferred to this Fairmont, Nebraska.
You know why they picked you? Is there something that...
Because I had a pretty good record in B-17s.
Okay.
And then we were sent to Nebraska, and I was assigned to a crew with a Major Taylor, who was a very, very good pilot, but he hadn't seen any action as far as combat is concerned. He had flown mostly experimental flights down in Florida. And I was assigned to his crew, and one thing that happened in there, when we got B-29s from the factory, they handed us a great big book, almost like a telephone book, that explained the B-29 airplane. And my Major Taylor gave me the book, and he said, "Now read this good, Speedy." And they didn't call me Speedy at that time. He said, "Read this good." And I had it about 4 days, and I gave it back to him. And he said, "Man, you are Speedy." And that name hung on me for the rest of the time I was in the Air Force.
It's a good name to have. That's a good name to have.
Yeah. And
so
we...
did you learn the whole book in 4 days? Did you learn the whole book in 4 days?
I did.
Amazing.
I did. Fortunately, I could read and get photographic memory. Um, that was an asset to me. And then we finally got the B-29s from the factory, and we began to stage with the crew. And we had 10 of us on the crew. Navigator, pilot, bombardier, and tail gunners and so forth. And while we were there, we had more time in the B-29s than anybody else in the United States. And that's when Colonel Tibbets came through, and he was seeking out crews for a new program that he was assigned to. And fortunately, the 393rd had a lot of time in the B-29 and a lot of good records, good reports. And he decided he would take 15 of us from that bomb group. There were about 45 airplanes in that bomb group, and take us out to Wendover, Utah. And our whole group was transferred. The 393rd Bomb Squadron was sent to Utah.
How big was the squadron?
Pardon me?
How big was the squadron?
Squadron, 15 airplanes.
15 airplanes.
About
okay.
45 in the bomb group.
Gotcha.
So about two-thirds of us stayed back. And those guys went out to Saipan right after we got transferred. So they were one of the first groups. We would have been in one of the first groups that bombed Japan if we hadn't been transferred. So we got to Wendover, Utah, and we met Colonel Tibbets at a theater, and he told us that we were going to be working on a top secret program, and our orders were not to talk to anybody about it, and not to discuss it, even with our own crew.
And this is 1945, right?
1945, September 45, 44.
September of 44, okay.
September 44. Yeah, and so he said, you're going to be working on a top secret program, and he said, I'm not about to tell you what it is, and you're not about to tell anybody what it is, not even to where you're stationed. And so
how'd you feel about that? How'd you feel about that?
Well, we felt pretty good about it. We were, like anybody else, we were wondering what was going on in the Air Force that had to be so secretive. And but we did a lot of flying, and then they sent us down to Cuba to do over-water navigation. We were there for about a month, and fortunately we had a good mess officer. He fed us a lot of lobster down there, and we were living like kings for a while. And then we got back to Wendover, and we got orders to go to Lincoln, to Omaha, Nebraska, to the Martin Marietta plant and pick up brand new airplanes. They were just coming off the factory line. And when we got those airplanes, we found out that they were completely modified. The bomb bays had been enlarged a little bit. They put some heavy equipment in the bomb bay to hold a heavy bomb, and we didn't know what it was for. And
probably could figure it out, though, couldn't you, by that point in time?
Yeah. And they had quick opening bomb bay doors, special propellers, the reversible propellers. We could back that airplane up on the ground. And all of the turrets and armament was taken out. And even the protective armor plate was removed. So the airplanes were very light, and they could fly very high and very fast. In fact, they were one of the top airplanes in the Air Force. Fighters couldn't get up to us because we were flying at 35,000 feet.
It was pressurized then too, right? It was pressurized cabin.
Pressurized cabins. No laboratories.
No.
That was standard in the Air Force, and I understand it still is today. They have relief tubes, but no laboratories. And so we had a 5-gallon can of a milk can that they use for storing milk in Iowa and on the farmers, and we use that for a laboratory.
How do you compare flying a B-17 versus the B-29?
Oh, the B-29 was a fantastic airplane. So much improved over the B-17. B-17 was not pressurized. You fly at 30,000, you couldn't get up to 30,000 feet with it, but they were cold, and when you're a high altitude, 20,000 feet, the temperature was pretty close to zero all the time. In the B-29, we'd sit in a pressurized cabin. You'd just wear a little flight jacket in it to keep warm, and so that's what we trained in. And while we were in Wendover, we trained. We were sent to an airfield down in Southern California, and there we were introduced to a super bomb. It was a 10,000-pound bomb, just fit in the bomb bay, and it was like a teardrop. We had to drop those bombs, those practice bombs, and we had them flying all over the air because they didn't know what the ballistics were on it. And finally, they had a tail that they put on that acted like a parachute to slow that thing down. And finally, they could find out exactly how it would fall out of the B-29. And we didn't know what they were for. And we were told they were going to be carrying about 10,000 pounds of high explosives, and that we were going to be using those over in carrying them up to Japan. And so we finally went and ended our training in Wendover, Utah, and from there in June of 1944, we were shipped to Tinian, the island in the Marianas, and flew from San Francisco to Hawaii to Kwajalein, and then on into Tinian.
So when you were practicing the drops for the 10,000-pound bombs,
yeah.
What's the plane's reaction when you dropped that bomb?
It would jump about 200 feet when that bomb dropped, because you'd lose 10,000 pounds, and that airplane is much lighter, and it would automatically almost fly itself and jump a little bit. But then when we got to Tinian, we were amazed at the islands that we were stationed on. There were 4 runways, 8,000-foot runways that the Sea Beast had built on that island. And the islands were loaded with B-29s, probably about 300 or 400 airplanes. And then we found out that Tinian had about the same number of, not Tinian, Saipan, which is right next to Tinian. Only about 5 miles apart from those 2 islands. And on Tinian they had 2 airfields, Northfield and Westfield. Westfield only had 2 runways, but they had about another 150 B-29s stationed on there. So altogether we found out that in the Pacific they had about 600 or 700 airplanes that were ready to bomb, or were bombing Japan already. Because this was after they had started about 6 months of bombing on Japan. They'd lost a lot of airplanes. A lot of the guys in the 504th that we were training with in Nebraska were lost with airplanes that ditched in the ocean. The B-29 was notorious for losing engines on some of those flights because they would overheat. And when they overheated, they had fires and they would lose those airplanes, so quite often. And then when we got over to Tinian, we were assigned a special area in the on this 4-runway field, and it was sealed off from all the other airplanes, all the other pilots and crews on the islands, because it was a top secret program.
No mingling at all with your counterparts.
We didn't mingle with the other guys at all, and they were kind of perturbed about what we were doing, because they didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what we were doing.
You just shared the runways, that was all.
Yeah, and finally we qualified to bomb Japan, and our crew was one of the first ones that took these, what we call pumpkins, up to Japan, and our mission was to take that 10,000 pound bomb and try to hit probably an airplane target, or a refinery, or an industrial plant in Japan. And so we had 4 missions with the B-29 and the pumpkin. And then
pumpkin actually exploded?
We hit about 1 out of 3 targets.
Okay.
On that on our mission. And then one Sunday afternoon we were called into a special briefing, and Colonel Tibbets had selected 7 airplanes, and ours was one of them, on a special mission. It was supposedly mission number 13. I don't know why they signed it 13. But we would meet on the evening of Sunday night, and we were told that our ship was going to be flying to Nagasaki, and our job was to report the weather at that particular time over that target. And there were 2 other ships that were selected, one to go to Kokura, one to go to Nagasaki, or Hiroshima. There were 3 targets that were designated that evening, and we didn't know what they were for. But anyway, we got out to the flight line, and our ship was parked right next to the Colonel Tibbets' ship, and they had changed the name on it, and changed the tail designation on it to a R, and our ship had been changed from a Black Arrow Squadron, which was our signature for our group, to one of the squadrons that were part of the 20th Air Force, and we had a big P on our tail. And our designation was numbers 83, and the Enola Gay had a new name on it, which was parked right next to our ship. And we tried to go over and nose around and see what was going on, because they had a lot of floodlights out there and cameras that were taking pictures of the crew as it was getting ready to take off. And the MPs prevented us from intermingling with anybody on the other crew. And somebody said that, oh, there's something happening tonight. And so we took off about an hour. Our ship took off about 1:30 in the morning, and the Enola Gay was assigned a 2:30, around a 2:30 takeoff, about an hour behind us. So that would put us over the target about an hour previous to where the ship that was carrying the bomb. We didn't know it was a bomb.
But you were flying to Nagasaki that night, or to Hiroshima?
Pardon?
You were flying to Hiroshima or Nagasaki that night?
We were flying to Hiroshima. No, Nagasaki.
Nagasaki, okay.
Yeah, our target was Nagasaki. A fellow by the name of, can't think of his name right now. His target was Hiroshima, and the other one was Kokura. Those 3 ships would radio the weather reports back to the Enola Gay.
Gotcha.
And so what we did, we were over the main target, Nagasaki, about 7:30 in the morning, and the weather was about 3/10 covered with clouds, and it was perfect weather for visual bombing. And all 3 targets reported the same conditions. And so we heard later on that when Colonel Tibbets got the weather reports, he said that, well, Hiroshima is going to be our target this morning. And that's what they hit. And of course, we were on our way home at that time, and we were about 300 miles away from where the bomb would drop. But then we didn't know what kind of a bomb it was. And then we flew back home, and we landed, and then the Enola Gay came in about an hour behind us, and there was a big party going on, and we heard something about an atomic weapon that had been reported from Washington, D.C.
What was your reaction to that personally?
Well, we were our reaction was, this is what all this crap was about, that we were tied in and so secretive about it. And
did you know what it meant, do you think, at the time? Do you know what it meant, the atomic bomb?
We didn't know what it meant, no. It was not until a couple of days later we found out it wiped out half the city, and that they were planning on another bomb. We figured that if that was going to be, that was going to be an end to the war in a few days, because we were wondering what all going on out there, because everything was going up to Okinawa. All the fellas from Europe were being transferred to stage in Okinawa, and we heard rumors that they were going to be invading Japan. in October, which was only 3 months away. And that would have been a tragedy. Japan had all the beaches that they could possibly use for invasion were heavily armed by Japan. And they were even teaching their young children to carry grenades and destroy the fellows that were being invading Japan with grenades, and they blow them up. And that's how serious they were about protecting their nation. One thing different about the Japanese, they would not surrender. Very few surrenders. Even on the Iwo Jima, the Japanese Japanese defenders would commit suicide rather than be taken in. And even the people on Saipan, the citizens on Saipan, about 8,000 of them had jumped off a cliff with their children and then committed suicide because the rumors were that the Americans were so terrible to their women and so forth. But these rumors were, of course, not true. But anyway, when we got back, there was a big party, big beer bust on Saipan, on the Tinian, because they had heard that we had dropped something different, and that the war would probably be over in a matter of a few days. But then General Groves decided that they had another bomb ready, which was called a Fat Man, and it was the same contour that we were using for our pumpkins, and but it would be an atomic weapon that they could use for the second mission. Well, on the second mission, 3 days later, two or 3 days later, we were briefed again, and that particular mission, they always had 6 ships that assigned to that. There were 5 ships assigned to that one, to the bombing of Nagasaki, because there were only 2 targets that they could need the weather for, and one was Kokura and one was Nagasaki. And our ship was assigned to be a bomb ship, or a standby ship on Iwo Jima, in case any of the ships that were in the mission had to abort. They would come in and take our airplane and either transfer the bomb or transfer whatever the assignment was on that particular mission. So we sat on Iwo Jima for about 5 hours waiting for the report of that bomb being dropped. Well, the bomb on the mission to Nagasaki was a screwed up mission. They got to Kokura. The weather ship, or the bomb ship, never got contact with the instrument ship. There was an instrument ship, a photography ship, and the bomb ship were assigned to be at the target when the bomb was dropped. Well, there were only 2 ships that got together. The other one, they never did find out what happened to it. It got lost. But Kokura, they flew over Kokura for about 2 hours, a couple hours, waiting for the weather to clear. And the weather never cleared, because they had orders to drop that bomb visually and not by instrument, not by radar. And then Colonel Sweeney decided that they couldn't bomb Kokura because of the clouds and so forth. So they said, we'll go down and bomb the alternate, which was Nagasaki. And when they got to Nagasaki, the weather was almost the same at Nagasaki. There were clouds over the target. And finally, they were running so low on gasoline, they could not take that bomb back to the Tinian because they didn't have enough gas to carry a 10,000-pound bomb. So they decided to drop it by radar. And when they got on the radar mission, or the radar track, the bombardier found a little hole in the clouds. He said, I can see it, I can see it. And they decided to drop that bomb rather by radar, drop it visually. Well, they dropped that bomb and they missed their target by about 3 miles. But it was fortunate that we heard this later. If they had hit their target, they would have hit a prisoner of war camp that the British had, all British soldiers, of about 12,000 men. And as a result of that mission screwed up like that, those men were saved. But the bomb itself was probably did about half the damage that it could, because it was a much bigger bomb than the one that dropped on Nagasaki, on Hiroshima. And it dropped up in a valley between some mountains that dissipated some of the explosion power of it. And so when they got back, after they dropped that bomb, they only had enough gas to get to Okinawa. And that was a 2-hour flight. When they landed on Okinawa, they hit the runway, and they hit the runway going the wrong way against traffic, because we didn't know what was going on out there. I don't know if I should take this, but they landed against traffic, and they missed a couple of B-24s that were ready to take off. And when they turned off the runway, 2 of the engines quit.
Oh, wow.
That's how close they were. Then they got, General Doolittle was in charge of Okinawa, and they had to beg for some gasoline to get back to Tinian. So they got about 600 gallons of gasoline from the Air Force up there, and they had enough to get back home, which they did after that. But that mission took about, they took off in 2 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't get back until about 6 o'clock in the evening the next day. So it was a long mission. Normally those missions were about 15 hours flight time. When we went up to bomb Japan, we would figure on 15 or 14 hours flying time. And what else?
So was the boxcar met with the same fanfare as Enola Gay when she returned?
Yeah, all these airplanes, physically they were all the same.
No, I mean, was there a big party when the boxcar came back?
No, not a party, because they were so late coming in, and it was very kind of quiet that night, because we didn't know, they were just lucky that they got home. And first thing they did, they wanted to go to bed. But there was no big party that night.
What was the mood of the guys that were?
Well, we figured that the war was going to be over. That was, the general feeling on the island was that we're not going to have to invade anymore, because they wiped out a couple cities. And the rumor was now that we had this bomb, that they were ready to drop more. And we found out later that the 3rd bomb was in San Francisco, ready to get shipped over when they bombed Nagasaki. But it never did get transferred, because the Japanese had indicated that they would surrender by that time. But it was an amazing program that we never knew about, because we were part of 4 things on what was called the Manhattan Project. The government had built 2 big plants in the United States, one in Tennessee, Oak Ridge, where they produced uranium, and another one up in Hanford, Washington, where they produced plutonium. The 2nd bomb was a plutonium bomb, much more powerful than a uranium bomb was. And then the 3rd wing was the place in Los Alamos, where they had moved all of the scientists, and they were the ones that designed the bomb and produced the bomb. They did all the experimental work to find out if it would work at all, and then they designed the bomb casings so that it would fit into a bomb bay. They had designed a bomb that would fit into that bomb bay that was designed for that purpose. And then the 4th wing was the air crews that would carry that bomb, and that's what we were in. But we never knew about Los Alamos. We never knew about Tennessee, Oak Ridge. We never knew about Hanford until after the war, and then all these things came out. It was the best kept secret of the war for the United States. What else do you want to know?
How long were you in after that? The war ended. The war ended in 45 in August.
No, yeah. What happened was most of the bomb crews that had bombed Japan were allowed to fly up to Japan and even land at Japan. So they got a chance to visit the country up there. And but our ships, because of the top secret equipment on them, were restricted. We did not. They wouldn't let us fly to Japan because of the equipment that we had on them. So we had to sit on Tinian for about 2 more months. And finally we got orders to fly home. And we flew home in November. I remember I landed the same day my girlfriend's birthday, November 7th. And we were sent to...
Where did you land when you came back?
We were shipped into Roswell, New Mexico. We landed in Sacramento from Hawaii, and we stayed overnight in Sacramento, and the next morning we flew to Tinian. And we landed at Tinian, and about 3 days later, they came through and said, we're going to have some tests that are going to be held at Bikini, and if you want to stay in, you may stay in. If you have enough points, you can get out and get your discharge. I had enough points, I took my discharge. And thought I would get a job with the airlines with about 200,000 other guys doing the same thing. Yeah. And I had enough college credits that I could qualify to get into a dental school in California. And if I would take about 12 hours of college courses before that. So I did that. When I got back to California, I went to school at Long Beach State, Long Beach City College, and picked up some physics and some scientific courses. And I qualified to get into USC Dental School, and that's how I changed my career.
It's quite a change, that's right.
Quite a change. Yeah.
Now you came to Long Beach just to go to school?
I chased my girlfriend out here. During the war, she got transferred. Her father was a pastor, and he took a church in California, and so I chased her. It took me 10 years to finally get her, though. I had to spend another. We dated for 5 years, 4 years from the time that we went to college, all during the war. And then when I was in dental school, we had another four years before we got married. And 3 days after I got my degree from USC and got my doctor's degree, we got married.
Right.
And
great story. Wonderful story. It really is.
Good.
So was she in Long Beach when she chased her out here?
Paramount.
Okay, Paramount.
Yeah.
So you came west. So you've been a doctor for how many years now?
I practiced about 38 years.
Okay.
Yeah. I graduated, let's see, it's 62 years since we dropped the bomb. About 52 years I practiced. I didn't practice, but
Did you practice locally here?
I retired when I was 65.
Where did you practice?
Bellflower.
Bellflower, okay.
Bellflower, California.
So, any kids?
Got 2 kids, yep. The 393rd has had reunions for the last 10 years about every year. And this year we're going to have our reunion in 66, 60, I forget which one, 62 and not. But we're going out and see the B-2.
Ah.
We've been invited to go to Whiteman Air Force Base, see what the current setup is for the atomic weapons. I'm looking forward to that.
What was the impact that going to the war had on you, do you think?
Pardon?
What was the impact of being in the military on you?
Oh, I figured I did my duty, and I got through on the GI Bill. That helped me get through dental school without having to worry about money. Even got a monthly check to live on. But I had to do a little work on the side, cleaning restaurants and so forth.
So do you still keep in contact with your friends from
Yeah.
Indian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The 393rd was kind of a close-knit group. There were only about, in the first 10 years, first 20 years, 30 years, we had reunions, but we only had it for the flight crews and not the rest of the guys, or maintenance crews and so forth. But then in the 1970, I headed up the reunion in San Diego, and we voted to enlarge it to the rest of the 393rd, or the rest of the 509th. The 509th had about 1,700 members in it, but the flight crews, they only had about 45. So we had to expand our reunions. And, so we're still meeting. There's not too many veterans left. On our crew, I'm the only one that's left. I would imagine of the 40, there were about 40 guys that were involved in both missions, or in the missions that were atomic missions, and I would say probably about 15 of them are left now. So we're getting kind of low.
So you've got grandkids too?
I got grandkids, I got great-grandkids, I got 6 on the way, and 6 grandkids, great-grandkids now, and 4 on the way.
Wow.
And there are going to be 10 of them all under 5 years of age.
Do you know all their names?
The last 3 are not named yet. So the last 4 are not named yet. They're on the way. They'll be due in August.
So do you have any doctors in the family?
Hmm?
Do you have any doctors in the family? Any of your kids were doctors? Or grandkids doctors?
No. I got several pastors.
Hmm.
Several pastors in our family.
Well, you've done very well. And I certainly want to thank you for your contributions to our country, serving back in World War II and what you did. I know it was a challenge, and your old generation took up that challenge.
It's the greatest generation.
Absolutely right.
Right.
Totally correct.
Yeah.
And you came back and got back to work and became a dentist and raised a family, and
right.
and here we go. But I want to thank you for your time, sir. I do really appreciate the story.
Okay, very good.